Okay, so how did I get here? Or how did this whole thing start? I started out as a 12-year-old who was an okay student, liked reading books, was not athletic at all. And for one reason or another, I got into riding bikes. I don't really remember the course of events, but somehow I got into riding bikes. I did my first bike race in 1986 at 12 years old and got dead last place. A year later, I had moved on and was U.S. national champion at I guess it would be 2 years later, at 14 years old. I moved up little by little through the ranks, and at 18 years old, I was ready to turn professional. Now, it's important, at this point in time, I basically had a choice, and this is a choice that almost any professional cyclist at this level goes through, in that if you're going to move to Europe and you're going to do this sport, or if you're European and you're going to do this sport, you dedicate yourself to it 100%. You're riding 1,000 kilometers a week. You're spending 40 some odd hours doing various exercise-related activities, and the other hours per week, and the other hours in your day are basically you're so tired you can't do anything else. So if you want to dedicate yourself to the sport, it is all in. Meaning that I had to give up a social life, I had to give up going to university, I had to give up pretty much everything else that was going on in order to do this. And this is the case with every single professional cyclist out there. That's important because as we get into what's happened in the sport of cycling, you're going to understand why those decisions early on are sort of tough to back away from when you're 25 years old, and the reason that this environment in cycling has gone through a large change. So, bike racing's problem. I think bike racing is the most beautiful sport in the world. The Tour de France is an incredible event. However, over the past 10 years, it's obviously seen, well, I'd say over the past 20 years, it's seen some incredible problems regarding doping. Doping in cycling, if you go back to when it sort of started in the 1950s and 60s, people were taking amphetamines or steroids, and at that point in time, it wasn't considered doping. It was considered just taking some medication to help you out with your bike racing, just like smoking used to be good for you. As we move forward, obviously those drugs were shown to have a lot of negative effects on people, especially on high-level athletes. And so testing was introduced. Drug testing is introduced, and it actually starts to reduce the problem. But of course, you're always going to have people that want to stay one step ahead of where the tests are. The big issue, and I've heard a lot of people say, well, why don't you just let everyone take drugs, and then the playing field will be even? That's a fundamentally bunk argument, because if you just took drugs completely out of the equation in any professional sport, or let everyone take whatever they want, excuse me, what you would get is that some people would, well, like I don't know, when everyone here, maybe you guys have had a hangover before. Some of you, when you take one aspirin, that hangover goes away. Some of you maybe take 2 aspirin. Some of you can take 8 and it still wouldn't go away. The same applies with performance-enhancing drugs. It doesn't equal the playing field if you just let everyone do it. It actually completely messes up the Darwinian aspect of sports. The best rider will not win, even if everyone is taking the exact same drug. It's just not the way human physiology works. You're basically creating a winner out of the person whose physiology happens to be really well adapted to the drug of choice in that day. That, to me, is just, it's fundamentally wrong. The reason I really don't, and the reason that I think that this problem has to be solved, and is being solved, is that if you've got a kid, like I was, at 18 or 19 years old, and you get to a modern generation, and cycling is in a modern generation right now, or I should say, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, is in a point where the drugs were becoming so effectively strong they were changing the race results. It wasn't just like a little bit of caffeine and you know creates a little buzz and you get out there and you might beat your buddy and you might not, or you might beat your competitor, you might not. It was actually totally fundamentally changing the way races were ridden, and the winners, I would say in 1995, 96, mid-90s, I would say almost 0% of the winners of major races were not doping at that point in time, which is a pretty sobering fact. So I was, in 1995, just coming into the pro scene, and I had decided this is what I'm going to do. So I was coming into an environment where I was unaware of the fact that behind the scenes, behind closed doors, that this was the reality, but I had decided to leave everything else and all my other options in life behind. So you can imagine, what do you do in that situation? You're stuck between a rock and a hard place. You can't really go back. And that's a horrible, horrible position for a young man to be in. This is a little bit further on in my career. The picture of me on the far, well, my right hand, your left hand side, is from a wasp sting. I'm obviously allergic to wasps. This picture is on the cover of USA Today, actually. On the rest day of the Tour de France, in my third Tour de France, I was stung by a wasp just out on a short little training spin to loosen up. This was about 3 days from the end of the race. I had won a stage in the Tour de France this year. I was doing quite well in the race overall. It was, by far, it was going to be my best Tour de France. I was actually very, very proud of how I was riding in this race. When I went to the hospital with my team physician and said, you know, obviously I'm having a large reaction to this wasp sting, the doctor said, okay, well, this is easily fixed. We're going to give you a shot of cortisone. Cortisone is a corticosteroid. Doesn't mean it's an anabolic steroid, but it is performance enhancing in its own way, and it is illegal. Or I should say it's restricted. You can use it for asthma, you can use it for a knee injury, but at this point in time in cycling, you couldn't use it for an allergic reaction. So I went into the hospital, and the doctor said, well, we're going to give you this. And my team doctor said, absolutely not, you can't do that. And I said, well, wait a minute, why not? That you can use it for a knee injury, you can use it for asthma. He said, yeah, but you can't use it for this allergic reaction. And I said, well, listen, we all have these little books that the doctors sign off on restricted medications, not banned, restricted medications. And I know, as a fact, that 90% of the guys in the race right now have their little booklet signed off on that says they have either a knee injury or asthma. And I don't have anything in mind, so you could go ahead and say I have a knee injury, and isn't it weird that it made my face swell up? And the doctor said, no, I don't think we should do that. And so we went back to the team manager, which would be the guy who has my job now on this French team that I was on at this point in time. And I said, Roger, this is ridiculous. Let's just sign the book. I want to finish a Tour de France. You know, this is going to be the sporting achievement of my life. I'm not going to drop out because of a stupid wasp sting. Let's just sign it. Let's just say I have a knee injury. Let's get on with it. And he said, and this was a very changing moment in my life. He said, no, that's lying and that's wrong. And I'll tell you what, my reaction to him was very negative. I said, this is completely bullshit. I yelled and screamed and everything else, but he held his line. The next day, I went to the start of the race with swollen up like this. Obviously, I wasn't going to be able to compete, but I did go ahead and ride 5 miles of the race just to make a point. My point was that this rule was ridiculous. On the start line, most of the riders who saw me basically ridiculed me. They said, you know, what in the world, your team, you know, are they crazy? Just take the medication and be done with it. That was a real problem because in my head, I was all of a sudden, everyone was saying, you should lie, and that's the norm. And in my head, I was saying, I should lie, and that's the norm. My manager was saying, no, you shouldn't. And my mother's conscience way back here was saying, you shouldn't lie either. About a year later, I retired from professional cycling, not because I was too old or too slow or anything else. I was only 29 years old, because I really just could not deal with the question of constantly being between a rock and a hard place, constantly having to choose between either lying to your mother or disappointing your fans. So a few years later, I tried a few different things. I was a consultant for a Wall Street company on their community relations. I was a real estate agent and all this other stuff, but I got back to cycling. I started a little team of 16 and 17-year-old kids from Colorado, one of whom is actually on the professional team today, with a little bit of my own money. And I said, you know, I'm going to learn to enjoy bike racing for what it is. These kids are incredibly enthusiastic about this. They don't know about the dark side of the sport. So I'm just going to teach them how to do it. And, you know, when they get to the point where they might turn professional or not turn professional, well, that's not really my problem. So I just want to enjoy and give back a little bit to the sport that got me to this point in life. So I started out this little team. We quickly through what has become the motto of our team. We started winning a lot of races. The motto of our team is perfection is in the process. That means that our team, of course, we want to win races, and we win a lot of them now. But the important part is that we're perfecting the process, everything from nutrition to training to the latest aerodynamics to athlete psychology to teamwork to just precision across the board. And if we perfect that, I don't actually care, and I have my sponsors convinced that they shouldn't actually care whether our guys win or whether they get 20th. That the point is that their job is to perfect the process in getting there. Everything we do up to the moment of the start line, that has to be spot on. And if it's not, I'm very upset. And there is immense pressure on every single person, from chiropractors to doctors to massage therapists to truck drivers to the athletes, to have everything spot on in our organization. But once the race begins, then it's a race and it's an athletic competition. It is no longer a job, and it is no longer something that you're, just getting compensated to do, and that you're going to do whatever it takes to get the job done, because I feel sport should be sport. So, as we started winning all these national championships and so on and so forth in 2005, 2006, we started moving on to Europe. I got an investor, and this guy's name was Doug Ellis. He's my business partner, and he came to me and said, I want to make a team that goes to the Tour de France. And I said, well, that's going to cost a lot of money. And he said, well, how much? And I said, well, probably about $20 million. And I said, okay. And we talked, or he said, okay. And we talked, and excuse me. And I said, well, I'm going to have to tell you something. We're going to do this my way. And that means we're going to do this in a way where we are very much tied to the ethical code of our team. We're going to make a line, draw a line in the sand and say, this is the way we're going to do it. And we're going to be loud about that. And it may not work, because my experience as a professional in this sport is that if we say we're going to be clean and we're going to be loud about it, is that we may very well fail and you will be out $20 million, and don't blame me. He went for it. So we started along. So these are some of the early iterations of the team. We got a sponsor. TIAA was our first big corporate sponsor. People were appreciating that message. We weren't in the largest races yet, but they were appreciating the fundamentals of this. That what we were saying is that we're going to put doing it the right way above winning. And I don't think it hadn't really, in a lot of professional athletics, and what we're brought up with generally is that, winning, what is it? What do they say? Winning isn't the only thing, or wow. Anyway, it's just that we're brought up in an environment that winning is everything. Oh yeah, that's right. Winning isn't everything, it's the only thing there. Thank you. And we were doing something totally contrary to that. But it was garnering attention, and it was getting us sponsorship, which was interesting in the early iterations of it. So this is actually the team, and this would be in the Giro dItalia. So this is when we're starting to get to the largest races in the world. What's interesting here is that our message started resonating more and more, and we started garnering more and more sponsorship dollars because of what we were doing. Now, what that does is all the other teams start looking around, and they've, have 100 years of history of saying we have to win, and that the only way to give our sponsors value is by winning. And they start looking around and say, wait a minute, these guys are getting more sponsorship dollars. Now, this is something that applies to any business, is that basically our revenues were increasing while the rest of the worlds of cycling were decreasing, because we were, in a very transparent way, doing things completely different, and we were doing things on a very, very rigid ethical line. So doing the right thing ain't easy. So in 2008, this is when we first went to the Tour de France. This is David Miller, one of our top riders, who was a convicted doper. He won the world championships. He got caught for doping. He served a 2-year sentence, and we brought him onto our team, which everyone thinks is a little bit crazy. But he is someone who showed that I want a second chance. I want to do it the right way. And he's done it the hard way, and he's fought his way back all the way. He's never been world champion again, but he was second place in the world championships this last year. It took him probably, I guess it would be 6 years of slowly fighting his way back to the top in a clean way. And he's a very, very admirable character. This is the same story for the team. At first, in 2008, we were a little team that we had a great shtick. We were the clean team. We got a lot of recognition for that. But that wears off pretty quickly. People get tired of hearing, we're the good guys, everyone else is the bad guys. Not that we ever said anyone else is the bad guys, but people get tired of hearing that. What they eventually want to see is that the team is going to actually do well and be a winning team. Well, luckily what we had done is we'd popularized this whole anti-doping angle to the point at which the other team started looking around and saying, we want to be in on this as well. And as soon as they wanted to start being in on it, it basically leveled the playing field, or was an element in leveling the playing field, obviously with better technologies and drug testing and so on and so forth. So what had happened is that all of a sudden the sport of cycling started becoming much, much, much cleaner than it had been in years past. And so all of a sudden our guys started winning more and more. And we didn't need our little gimmick anymore. We were able to just say, by putting our heads out on the line, by following a rigid ethical line, we have actually changed the paradigm of an entire professional sport. So this is when you get to doing the right thing pays off. This is Johan van Sommeren. Johan van Sommeren is the tallest rider in professional cycling. That's sort of irrelevant to this, but in this picture, he is winning the largest one-day race in the world, the most important one-day race in the world, Paris-Roubaix. This is 2 weeks ago. We won it in a somewhat unconventional way, using tactics, using unconventional tactics, and you can see he's actually wearing a skin suit, which for those of you who aren't familiar with cycling, it's typical cyclists for a long distance event like that would be wearing a pair of shorts and a jersey. This is actually a one-piece suit, which normally would never be worn for an event that's, Paris-Roubaix is 180 kilometers long. We actually designed a one-piece suit that would be comfortable for that long. It's an example of using everything that you possibly can, eking out that last little millimeter, but staying clearly within the rules and clearly not jeopardizing his health at all. We estimate that skin suit over the 7-hour period of Paris-Roubaix saved him about 1,000 calories of total work, and that probably at 50 kilometers an hour, 30 miles an hour, it probably saved him about 15 watts of total effort. Blood doping, or using EPO, which increases your red blood cell counts, only helps you out about 20 watts. So the point is by looking at a little detail that everyone else had overlooked, we were able to give him almost the same advantage as if he had doped for the event. Leading by example, this is Thor Hushovd. I think I've talked actually a lot about leading by example so far, but this is Thor Hushovd. He's the current world champion. He rides for our team. He's someone who, through his entire career, even in some very, very tough years in cycling, has always ridden, even before he was on my team, has always ridden with a very anti-doping stance. And he is very much a leader in that movement. And we're super proud that he is now the current world champion and that he's on our team. Good changes come slow, which means this took basically a 10-year journey for me to actually try to change something that I felt and a lot of people felt was totally unchangeable. But by basically just being very determined and very patient, we were able to accomplish it. And the last part is the future. The good change also comes fast. Basically, that is, that's a 40-pound trophy that he got. He actually proposed to his girlfriend that day, and she became his fiancée. And he said, instead of a diamond, I'm going to give you a big rock. It's one of the cobblestones that's in this race. Anyway, that's just a play on words, meaning that that we ride really fast. So that's good changes come fast. And with that, that's about all I got. Thank you very much, and thanks for having me as your guest.